The bar was the kind of place where the lights were always dim, and the music was just loud enough to drown out the noise of the city outside. It was a popular spot, known for its extensive drink menu and sleek, modern decor that attracted a steady stream of patrons from all walks of life. Tonight, it was particularly busy with the after-work crowd mingling over cocktails and craft beers, the low hum of conversation filling the air. Ethan pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. He was immediately struck by the warmth of the place, a stark contrast to the cool autumn air outside. Dressed in a tailored suit and polished shoes, he looked every bit the successful young professional. As he moved further into the bar, he noticed a few heads turn, but he was used to that. His presence had a way of commanding attention, not just because of his sharp appearance, but also because of the quiet confidence he exuded. He walked over to the bar, scanning the rows of bottles lining the shelves. The bartender, Mike, was busy chatting with a group of customers at the far end of the counter. Ethan took a seat on one of the high stools, placing his phone and wallet on the counter in front of him. He caught Mike's eye and nodded politely, a silent signal that he was ready to order. But Mike didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the group of young professionals he'd been serving, laughing at something one of them said. Ethan frowned slightly, but didn't think much of it at first. It was a busy night, and bartenders had to juggle multiple orders at once. He could wait a few more minutes. As he waited, Ethan looked around the bar, observing the scene. It was a typical Thursday night crowd, mostly people in their 20s and 30s, unwinding after a long day at work. The place had a relaxed, yet lively atmosphere, with groups of friends gathered around tables, couples sitting close together, and solo patrons like him, taking a moment to themselves. Minutes passed, and Ethan noticed that Mike still hadn't come over to take his order. He watched as Mike served another customer who had just walked up to the bar. The man, white and casually dressed, was immediately greeted with a smile and a prompt offer to take his order. Ethan's frown deepened. He straightened up in his seat, raising his hand slightly to catch Mike's attention again. "Excuse me," Ethan called out, his voice calm but firm. Mike glanced in his direction, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, their eyes met, but then Mike turned away, pretending not to have heard. Instead, he moved further down the bar, pouring drinks for a pair of women who had just arrived. Ethan's patience began to wear thin. He had been nothing but polite, but it was clear now that Mike was deliberately ignoring him. A knot of frustration formed in his chest, but he forced himself to remain composed. He wasn't going to make a scene. Not yet. He glanced around, noticing that a few other patrons were watching the interaction, or rather, the lack thereof. He leaned forward on the counter, tapping his fingers lightly against the polished wood. His mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Was this just bad service, or was there something more to it? The uncomfortable possibility that this was about more than just a busy night at the bar began to creep into his thoughts. Just then, Mike approached another customer, a young woman who had taken a seat a few stools down from Ethan. She smiled at Mike, who smiled back, his demeanor warm and friendly. Ethan watched as Mike effortlessly engaged her in conversation, recommending a drink from the menu. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his rising irritation. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but the signs were becoming too obvious to ignore. He had been at the bar long before these other customers, yet Mike had chosen to serve everyone else but him. There was no mistaking the pattern now. The tension in the air thickened as Ethan sat there, his patience wearing thinner with each passing second. He was no stranger to subtle slights, the kind that others might overlook or dismiss, but this was blatant. His thoughts began to swirl with frustration and disbelief, but he kept his expression neutral, refusing to let the situation get the better of him. Ethan's attention snapped back to Mike, who was now laughing at a joke the young woman had made. It was clear that the bartender had no intention of serving him, and the realization hit Ethan like a cold slap. He glanced around the bar once more, hoping to catch the eye of another bartender, or perhaps even the manager. But Mike seemed to be the only one behind the counter tonight. Ethan clenched his jaw, feeling the sting of the situation. It wasn't just about being ignored. It was about what this implied. He could feel the eyes of the other patrons on him, some of them aware of the growing tension, others blissfully unaware as they enjoyed their evening. But for Ethan, this was more than just an inconvenience. It was a reminder of the subtle yet painful ways discrimination could manifest, even in the most seemingly progressive places. Ethan sat quietly at the bar, his patience now replaced with a simmering frustration. He had been waiting for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it had only been about 20 minutes. 20 minutes of being blatantly ignored while others were promptly served. The irritation that had started as a small flicker was now a steady flame, burning hotter with each passing moment. Mike, the bartender, continued to move about the bar with an air of casual indifference, serving one customer after another. Ethan watched as Mike chatted with the regulars, joked with the newcomers, and even offered a few free samples to a group of young men in suits who had clearly just come from work. Yet each time Mike glanced in Ethan's direction, there was a coldness, a deliberate choice to look away and focus on someone else. The bar, which had once seemed so inviting, now felt stifling to Ethan. He glanced around at the other patrons. Some were too absorbed in their conversations to notice what was happening, while others occasionally shot him sympathetic glances. But no one said anything. No one intervened. It was as if the scene was playing out in a vacuum, where Ethan's frustration and anger existed in isolation. A man sitting a few stools down leaned over and whispered to his companion, who looked over at Ethan and then at Mike. The companion shook his head slightly, a small gesture of disapproval, but neither of them did more than exchange a knowing glance. Ethan caught this interaction and felt a pang of resentment. It wasn't enough to be seen. He wanted someone, anyone, to acknowledge what was happening, to validate the injustice of it all. He cleared his throat, the sound more forceful this time, cutting through the low hum of the bar. "Excuse me," Ethan said again, louder, his voice carrying a subtle edge that hadn't been there before. This time, Mike couldn't ignore him. The bartender turned, a feigned expression of surprise on his face. "Oh, sorry," Mike said, though his tone was anything but apologetic. "Didn't see you there. What can I get you?" Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as he met Mike's gaze. "I've been waiting for a while," he replied evenly, though the frustration was clear in his voice. "A bourbon, neat, please." Mike nodded, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or maybe disdain. He turned away to grab a glass, but as he did, Ethan noticed the subtle roll of his eyes. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen that look before, countless times in different settings, and it always carried the same message. "You're not welcome here." As Mike poured the bourbon, Ethan couldn't help but replay the events of the evening in his mind. He had walked in just like any other customer, expecting the same level of service, the same courtesy. But from the moment he had taken his seat at the bar, he had been treated as less than. It was a feeling he knew all too well, one that gnawed at the edges of his dignity, reminding him of the countless times he had been made to feel invisible because of the color of his skin. When Mike finally set the drink down in front of him, the glass made a sharp clink against the counter, the sound harsher than it needed to be. Ethan stared at the drink for a moment, his fingers wrapping around the cool glass. He lifted it to his lips and took a slow sip, the warmth of the bourbon spreading through him, doing little to quell the anger simmering beneath the surface. Mike had already moved on, serving another customer with the same easygoing charm that had been so noticeably absent in his interactions with Ethan. As he watched Mike, Ethan felt a bitter taste in his mouth, one that had nothing to do with the drink. He had come here to unwind after a long day, to enjoy a quiet evening in a place that was supposed to be welcoming to all. But instead, he had found himself in the middle of yet another exhausting and demoralizing experience, one that was all too familiar. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter coming from a group near the end of the bar. He turned his head slightly to see a trio of women, all white, who had just been served their drinks by Mike. They clinked their glasses together, toasting to something Ethan couldn't hear. Mike, standing nearby, flashed them a broad smile, his demeanor completely different from the cold, distant manner he had shown Ethan. As Ethan sat there, watching the scene unfold, a part of him wanted to get up and leave, to walk out of the bar and never come back. But another part of him, the part that refused to be pushed aside, told him to stay. He wasn't going to let someone like Mike dictate where he could or couldn't go. The evening was supposed to be simple, just a drink at the bar before heading home. But now, Ethan found himself at a crossroads. He could choose to stay quiet, to let the slight go unchallenged, or he could stand his ground and confront the issue head-on. It was a decision he had faced many times before, and each time it weighed heavily on him. Ethan took another sip of his bourbon, his mind made up. He wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. He had worked too hard, come too far, to let someone like Mike make him feel small. As he set his glass back down on the counter, Ethan knew that the night was far from over. Whatever happened next, he was ready for it. Ethan's decision to stay had given him a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let this moment pass without standing up for himself. But he also knew he had to be smart about how he handled the situation. Confrontation could easily escalate, especially in a public setting like this, and he wanted to make sure his voice was heard without it turning into a spectacle. He continued to sip his bourbon, his eyes following Mike as the bartender made his rounds. The bar was still bustling, and Mike was busy, but that didn't excuse his blatant disregard for Ethan. The more Ethan thought about it, the more determined he became to address the issue directly. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for anyone who had ever been made to feel less than because of who they were. A few minutes later, Mike circled back to Ethan's end of the bar, this time wiping down the counter as he walked by. Ethan seized the moment, leaning forward slightly to catch Mike's attention. "Mike, right?" Ethan asked, his tone measured but firm. Mike looked up, his expression briefly surprised before settling into one of mild disinterest. "Yeah, that's me. What can I do for you?" Ethan held Mike's gaze, refusing to be intimidated by the bartender's dismissive attitude. "I couldn't help but notice that it took a while for you to serve me," Ethan began. "I've been sitting here for quite some time, and I watched as you served multiple people who arrived after me." Mike's face remained impassive, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Irritation, perhaps. "Like I said, it's busy tonight," he replied, his tone clipped. "I'm doing the best I can." Ethan nodded slowly, acknowledging Mike's response, but not accepting it. "I understand that, but it feels like you were avoiding me on purpose. I'd like to know why." Mike's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flash of defensiveness. "You're imagining things," Mike said, his voice laced with annoyance. "I treat all my customers the same." Ethan didn't flinch. He had expected this kind of response, but he wasn't about to back down. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, keeping his tone even. "Because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't look that way. And I'm pretty sure some of the other patrons noticed it too." At this, Mike's expression hardened. He straightened up, tossing the rag he'd been using to wipe down the counter into a nearby sink. "Look, I don't know what you're trying to imply, but I don't have time for this. If you've got a problem, maybe this isn't the place for you. Ethan felt a surge of anger at Mike's words, but he kept it in check. You're right, I do have a problem, he said, his voice low but firm. My problem is that I came here expecting to be treated with the same respect as everyone else. And instead, I've been made to feel like I don't belong. And that's not okay. Mike scoffed, clearly unimpressed by Ethan's resolve. Look, man, I'm just doing my job. If you don't like the service, you can take your business somewhere else. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Is that how you handle all your customers? By telling them to leave when they point out something that's wrong? Because I have to say, that's not a very professional attitude. Mike took a step closer, his posture aggressive. You think you can just come in here and tell me how to do my job? He snapped. I've been working here for years, and I know how to handle people like you. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine at the thinly veiled threat in Mike's words. There it was. The mask had slipped, and the truth was out in the open. This wasn't just about bad service. This was about something deeper, something uglier. And now, Ethan knew he couldn't let it slide. Before Ethan could respond, the door to the bar swung open, and a man in his late 50s walked in. He was well-dressed, with a commanding presence that immediately drew the attention of everyone in the room. The noise level dropped slightly as people recognized him. This was Daniel, the owner of the bar, and a respected figure in the community. Daniel's eyes scanned the room quickly, landing on the scene unfolding between Ethan and Mike. His expression tightened as he took in the tense standoff, and without hesitation, he made his way over to the bar. Mike? Daniel called out, his voice calm but firm. What's going on here? Mike's bravado faltered as he turned to face his boss. Nothing, Mr. Daniel. Just a misunderstanding with a customer. Daniel's gaze shifted to Ethan, his eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed the situation. Is that so? He asked, though it was clear he wasn't buying Mike's explanation. What kind of misunderstanding? Ethan met Daniel's gaze, recognizing the man immediately. He had seen Daniel's picture in various business publications, knew him to be a fair and respected businessman. But what Mike and the other patrons didn't know was that Ethan wasn't just any customer. He was Daniel's son. Ethan took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. There seems to be some confusion about how customers should be treated here, he said, his tone respectful but firm. I've been waiting for service for quite a while, but it seems like Mike here had other priorities. Daniel's expression darkened as he turned back to Mike. Is that true, Mike? Mike stammered, clearly caught off guard by the turn of events. I didn't mean anything by it, Mr. Daniel. It's just been a busy night, that's all. Daniel's gaze hardened. Busy or not, that's no excuse. Every customer deserves to be treated with respect, no matter who they are. The bar had gone completely silent now, all eyes on the unfolding confrontation. Ethan could see the discomfort in Mike's posture, the way he shifted uneasily under Daniel's stern gaze. But it wasn't enough. The damage had been done, and Ethan knew that this moment would have lasting consequences. Not just for Mike, but for everyone in the bar. As Daniel continued to address Mike, Ethan felt a sense of validation, but also a heaviness. This was the reality he had to face time and time again. No matter how much success he achieved, how well he dressed, or how polite he was, there would always be people like Mike who saw him as less than. But at least tonight, he had made his stand, and he wasn't alone in doing so. The atmosphere in the bar was thick with tension as Daniel, the owner, stood face to face with Mike. The once lively chatter had died down completely, leaving only the low hum of the bar's background music. All eyes were on the scene unfolding at the counter, where the dynamic between the characters had shifted dramatically. Mike's bravado had all but evaporated under Daniel's intense scrutiny. He fidgeted, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his earlier confidence replaced by a visible unease. It was clear to everyone present that he had crossed a line, but the full extent of the situation had yet to reveal itself. Daniel took a step closer to Mike, lowering his voice so that only those closest to the bar could hear. "Mike," he began, his tone measured and firm, "this isn't just about one bad interaction. It's about the way you choose to treat people. And